Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Nabi Yusuf and his multicolored coat. This episode is titled Yusuf the Prophetic Prepper. Now, in some earlier videos that I made about Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, I believe within the first 3 episodes, I discussed Nabi Nuh alayhi salam as the world's first prepper. You know, like storing aside goods, creating a protective shelter. And of course, it's a mobile shelter. And gathering foods and water, etc., to take care of himself, his family, and the creatures under his care, because he's a caliph of the earth. And as caliphs of the earth, a mature human being, perfected, we are called to protect all of Allah's beautiful, wondrous, interconnected, and interdependent creation. So he had to have his heart expanded as an ark to be able to contain all of creation within his heart, within his compassion, within his wisdom. And I was thinking about him as the first prepper, but what's interesting is recently I came to realize that Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam is also a very significant prepper. And because we know about in the Quranic story and in the biblical story, he stores away 7 years of grain during 7 years of abundance. He stores away the grain on behalf of the Pharaoh, on behalf of the government, stacks it away because he knows there's going to be 7 years of drought and famine coming in the future, and it needs to be stored away to protect the people. Now, what's interesting is in the biblical account, Joseph is depicted generally as a righteous man, but not as a Nabi. And he's a visionary, he's a clairvoyant, he's a dreamer and a reader of symbology, which is interesting that he was in Egypt, and as number 2 in the land, he would have been able to read hieroglyphics, which are signs. So it's interesting. So he's able to read the outer signs, the inner signs, and among the inner signs, I would argue, besides body sensations, breath, thoughts, and memories, etc., would be included dreams, which are often within the symbolic imaginal realm. But he realizes through Allah's guidance, through interpretation of dreams, and he also has the ability to not only read his own dreams, but to read the dreams of others. And this is partly pre-programmed into him as part of the prophetic reality, but also, remember, he learned directly from a prophet. Yaqub alayhi salam was also his first teacher, along with his mother, and may Allah be pleased with her. And I'm not sure about the stories, but I don't know to what extent he may have learned from his grandfather and great-grandfather, or received through his clay beds, through his genetic imprints, information on how to read reality through the prophetic lens. But during this 7 years of plenty, of abundance, he stacks away to prepare for the 7 years of drought. Now, what's interesting is in the biblical account, I went on a little tangent, it depicts him as doing something very evil. Once the drought commences, he takes this abundance, and over time, the people within Egypt and the outsiders come in, and eventually, he's able to strip everybody of their land, their resources, and even their sovereignty over themselves and their freedom. And it says in the biblical text, in some of the translations, that he enslaves the world. So he's a world enslaver, which is interesting because this is, you shall own nothing and be happy. This is very Clausian, very Pharaonic, very Dajjalic. So this is an instance where it's very helpful to do comparisons of the biblical text and the Quranic text, and in order to use the Quran as a lens and a corrective. And this does not mean that we cannot take benefit from the Genesis account. There are materials in there that are of benefit, that have been preserved, but we can read through a Quranic lens, inshallah, and derive benefit. But this particular point of him being an enslaver of the world, like, the Quran is completely against this. We are to end tyranny and oppression and to protect the vulnerable, the innocent, the poor, the widows, the orphans. So, as a Nabi, Yusuf, also we are to be on the path of sadaqah, to share. So I would argue that as a prophet, he uses these materials, this food, to share with the world and to share with others who come for assistance and for help, for aid. Now, what are some of the broader lessons that we can learn from the story of Yusuf in regard to the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of drought and the prepping, the saving up? So he saves up 7 years worth of food. Now, we know from studying the historical and scientific patterns of the world, we know that there are periods of drought, of famine, of ice ages. Ice ages and mini ice ages, it's a type of drought that will often lead to a type of famine. Drought, we tend to think of a time when the land is dry and barren and does not give forth produce. Well, this is also an ice age and mini ice age. The land is permafrost and won't give that forth. But what's confusing about it is during an ice age, it's all hydration. So it's got water everywhere, but the water is frozen and the land is frozen because of the water in the soil. So therefore, it's difficult to find food and sustenance. We may be going into a mini ice age soon. There are some earth changes potentially coming. Many people have intuitively known that we needed to be prepping, and so many people have began to stack away, to prep in advance. You know, food, clothing, candles, matches, water supplies, have dug deeper wells, have found ways of storing water and purifying water. We need to be, and I would argue that the Muslimin, we're actually behind in this area. The Muslims have been lulled into sleep, and many of those who have responsibility to inform the community have been withholding information for significant periods of time for a number of reasons. But what I wanted, like, so communities like, say, the Mormons are big preppers. You know, I look at it like, let's catch people doing the right thing. I respect a few things about the Mormons, such as they honor family life. They do once a week water fasting, which is quite healthy and beneficial. They prep as individuals, as families, and as a community, and I think that's highly beneficial. However, they're brotherhood network, and that's something to be very wary of. The apocalyptic Christians are very advanced with the prepping, and they are very wary of the mark of the beast and the one world financial and political system and religious system coming online currently. The Muslims are mostly asleep to this and are taking the mark of the beast or the precursor of the mark of the beast very actively and being encouraged to do so. We need to be very careful of this. It's going to lead to big problems. But while we have time, we should be storing, and we should definitely store food in advance. I heard from some Muslims recently that in their area, in their native areas, their elders have always encouraged to store at least 1 year of grain aside to protect from drought and famine. This is very wise practice. I honor and respect that. All of the Muslims, to the greatest of our ability, should be doing something similar. But perhaps we should be, if we can, to store up to 7 years' supply as individuals and families and communally. This would be wise practice, especially for those who are wise enough to have already gone to the mountains and have formed healthy communities. I don't know to the extent that we have done that. I have not seen evidence of this, but then people are going to be quiet about this, and that's wise as well. But 7 years might be too much for those making Hijrah or those who are in a stable condition. We need to be getting out of the metro areas and the cities as much as possible. And one thing I would argue that there's another model of Hijrah, which is more of a nomadic place where we're always near Allah and we're always on the earth, and we are originally nomadic as a species. And I believe we're going to go back to a nomadic and semi-nomadic state moving forward, inshallah, in the future. But that's on the other side of all this devilry that we're facing. So may we live wisely. May we become egoless so that we can get the message clear from Allah. Make a lot of sajda. May we become more wise, more expansive in our hearts and in our minds, and go into more of an egoless flow state. So this other kind of hijrah I'll talk about in another video is more related to tawakkul and trusting in Allah and a deep trust that Allah will provide for us as He provides for all the creatures. He provides for the sparrows. This is not an ideal thing for people to be like, to not have rootedness. It's very difficult to be in an unrooted state. Now, in an unrooted state, that's apparent because we should have our roots in Deen. We should have our roots in the natural, organic, holistic way of life that is Islam, and rooted in the true ancestral ways, which is true Islam. And so anyway, I'll bring it to a close, but just consider that Nabi Yusuf, alayhi salam, his story as the prepper, there's much more, and perhaps I'm going to go back, I intend to go back and look at the story again comparatively and more deeply in order to find more gems and jewels from his story. But the prepper aspect of his story I've not seen unpacked or unlocked. Him and Nabi Nuh as preppers. So consider this. It's a very interesting way of reading the story and taking benefit, and it's very much relevant to our current era, our current moment in time. So until next time, this is your brother Yasin reporting from Dahab on a windy day on the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, here in the southern Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, these ancestral prophetic lands. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.